I never believed in Bigfoot until the summer of 1980, when I met one that spoke to me in perfect English on a hiking trail in the Cascade Mountains of Oregon. And what happened when that creature realized I was recording our conversation changed my entire life, forcing me to make a choice between proof and survival. Let me tell you this story from the beginning, because even now, at 72 years old, I still wake up some nights hearing that voice in the darkness. My name is Vincent Holloway, and in 1980 I was 27 years old, working as a freelance nature photographer based out of Portland, Oregon. It was a good time to be young and independent. The economy was recovering. Mount St. Helens had just erupted that May, and the whole Pacific Northwest was buzzing with geological excitement. And I was making decent money selling photographs to outdoor magazines like Field and Stream and National Geographic. I'd grown up in Salem, Oregon, the son of a lumber mill worker and an elementary school teacher. My childhood was spent exploring the forests around the Willamette Valley, learning to identify trees and birds, developing a deep love for the wilderness that eventually turned into a career. After high school in 1971, I'd attended Oregon State University for 2 years, studying forestry, before dropping out to pursue photography full-time. My parents weren't thrilled, but by 1980, I was proving them wrong. I had a portfolio, regular clients, and enough income to afford a small apartment in Northwest Portland and a reliable vehicle. That vehicle was a 1978 Ford Bronco, brown with a white top, equipped with four-wheel drive and enough cargo space for all my camera equipment. In 1980, that Bronco represented freedom to me, the ability to go anywhere, chase any photograph, explore any trail. The summer of 1980 was particularly hot. I remember listening to the radio constantly. Blondie's Call Me was playing everywhere, along with Queen's Crazy Little Thing Called Love. The Summer Olympics were happening in Moscow, though the U.S. had boycotted them over the Soviet invasions of Afghanistan. Ronald Reagan was campaigning for president, and I was spending as much time as possible in the mountains, trying to capture images of wildlife and landscapes before the autumn rains began. On July 18, 1980, I drove east from Portland into the Cascade Range, heading for a remote area near Mount Hood, where I'd heard reports of a family of black bears frequenting a particular valley. My assignment was for Outdoor Life magazine. They wanted a photo essay on bear behavior during salmon spawning season. I left Portland at 4 a.m., my Bronco loaded with camera equipment, 2 Nikon f2 bodies, multiple lenses ranging from 50mm to 400mm, dozens of rolls of Kodachrome film, a tripod, and my most recent acquisition, a Sony TCM600 cassette recorder that I'd bought just 2 weeks earlier for $60 at an electronics store downtown. The recorder was a compact device about the size of a paperback book, with a built-in microphone and the ability to record up to 90 minutes on a single cassette tape. I'd bought it because I wanted to start documenting ambient forest sounds to accompany my photographs. Birdsong, wind through trees, streams flowing. Some magazines were interested in multimedia presentations, and I figured having audio recordings would give me an edge over other photographers. I had no idea how important that recorder would become. The drive to the trailhead took nearly 3 hours, winding through small towns like Sandy and Government Camp, climbing steadily into the mountains. By 7 a.m., I was parked at a remote Forest Service access road, the Bronco hidden behind a stand of Douglas firs, my gear packed into my hiking backpack. The trail I planned to follow wasn't on any official map. I'd learned about it from an old-timer named Walt, who I'd met at a bar in Government Camp a month earlier. Walt had been a logger in these mountains for 40 years, and he'd told me about a valley where bears congregated every summer because of a particular creek that had exceptional salmon runs. "Nobody goes there anymore," Walt had said, nursing a Budweiser. Logging company abandoned it in the 60s after they clear-cut the accessible areas. But the deeper valley still has old-growth trees and that creek. Bears love it. You want pictures? That's where you go. He'd drawn me a rough map on a cocktail napkin, showing landmarks, a distinctive rock formation, a fallen cedar tree that bridged the creek, a meadow with old rusted logging cables still lying in the grass. I'd kept that napkin, and now I followed its directions, hiking northeast through thick forest, climbing steadily. The morning was already warm, promising another scorching day. I wore jeans, a plaid flannel shirt over a t-shirt, hiking boots, and a baseball cap with the Oregon State Beavers logo. My backpack was heavy, probably 50 pounds with all the camera equipment, but I was young and in good shape from regular hiking. The forest was beautiful that morning. Shafts of sunlight filtered through the canopy, illuminating patches of ferns and wildflowers. I could hear Steller's jays calling, the distant drumming of a pileated woodpecker, and the constant white noise of wind moving through pine branches. I stopped periodically to take photographs, a cluster of mushrooms growing on a fallen log, a spider web covered in morning dew, the play of light and shadow on tree bark. Around 9 a.m., I reached the creek Walt had described. It was perfect, about 20 feet wide, crystal clear, flowing over rounded stones with several deep pools where I could see salmon resting. The banks were lined with berry bushes, and I could see fresh bear tracks in the mud near the water's edge. I set up my equipment on a small rise that gave me a good vantage point of the creek and surrounding area. I mounted my Nikon with a 400mm lens on the tripod, loaded it with fresh film, and settled in to wait. Bear photography requires patience. Sometimes you wait hours or even days for the right shot. I also set up my Sony recorder, placing it on a flat rock near where I was sitting, and pressed record. The cassette tape began to turn, capturing the ambient sounds of the creek and forest. For the next several hours, I waited and watched. I ate the lunch I'd packed, a peanut butter sandwich, an apple, a Snickers bar, and water from my canteen. I took photographs of the creek, the salmon, a red-tailed hawk that perched briefly in a nearby tree. The temperature climbed into the 80s, and I shed my flannel shirt, working in just my t-shirt. Around 2 p.m., I finally saw what I'd come for. A large black bear emerged from the forest on the opposite bank of the creek. It was a beautiful animal, probably 400 pounds, with glossy black fur. I began photographing immediately, my camera's motor drive whirring as I captured the bear wading into the water, watching for salmon. I was so focused on the bear through my viewfinder that I didn't notice the other presence until I heard a voice behind me say, in perfect, unaccented English, "That's a nice camera you have there?" I froze. The voice was deep, resonant, unmistakably masculine, but with a quality I couldn't quite place, like hearing someone speak from the bottom of a well. I turned slowly, my heart suddenly hammering in my chest, and found myself looking up at something that shouldn't exist. It stood about 15 feet behind me, partially concealed by the shadows of a large cedar tree. Even in the shade I could see it clearly. A massive figure, easily 7.5 feet tall, covered in dark brown hair that hung in long, shaggy strands. The shoulders were incredibly broad, the arms long and muscular, ending in hands that looked almost human but much larger. The face was what shocked me most. It wasn't entirely ape-like, nor was it human. It was something in between, a broad, flat nose, a heavy brow ridge, high cheekbones, and a jaw that seemed almost too large for the skull. But the eyes were unmistakably intelligent, dark brown and alert, watching me with what I could only describe as curiosity. For several seconds, neither of us moved. My mind was racing, trying to process what I was seeing, trying to reconcile this creature's existence with everything I knew about the world. And then the most impossible part happened again. "I didn't mean to startle you," the creature said, its voice calm and measured. "I've been watching you photograph the bear. You're very patient." I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. I was literally speechless, staring at this creature that was speaking to me in English, perfect, grammatically correct English, with a vocabulary that suggested education and intelligence. "You can speak," the creature said, and I detected something like amusement in its tone. Most people scream and run when they see me. You're just staring. That's actually refreshing. You can talk, I finally managed to say, my voice hoarse. Obviously, the creature replied, though I rarely get the opportunity. You're the first human I've spoken to in, must be 3 years now, maybe 4. I lose track of time out here. The creature took a step forward, emerging more fully from the shadows, and I could see it better. The hair covering its body was thick and coarse, matted in places with bits of bark and pine needles. It wore no clothing, but its body was so completely covered in hair that it seemed natural, not obscene. The creature moved with a grace that seemed at odds with its massive size, carefully avoiding a patch of devil's club that would have caught on its legs. How do you speak English?" I asked, still unable to fully believe this was happening. The creature settled into a sitting position on a fallen log, the wood creaking under its weight. The casual nature of the gesture, sitting down as if we were two people having a normal conversation, made the whole situation even more surreal. "I learned it the same way anyone learns a language," it said, "by listening, observing, practicing. I've lived in these mountains for 47 years, and for much of that time, I've been near human settlements, close enough to hear conversations, to listen to radios and ranger stations, to watch humans interact. Language acquisition isn't difficult when you're motivated and have time." 47 years, I said, doing the math in my head. That would mean since 1933. 1933, yes. I was young then, barely past adolescence by our standards. My family and I migrated south from British Columbia, following food sources, avoiding human expansion. Eventually, I separated from them, a natural process for us, and I've been in Oregon ever since. I realized I was still sitting on the ground, my camera forgotten, staring up at this creature that was calmly explaining its life history to me. Part of my brain was screaming that this couldn't be real, that I must be suffering from heat stroke or had eaten bad food. But the creature was too detailed, too real, too present to be a hallucination. "What are you?" I asked. "I mean, I know people call you Bigfoot or Sasquatch, but what do you call yourselves?" The creature made a sound, a low, rumbling vocalization that seemed to come from deep in its chest. It took me a moment to realize it was laughing. "We don't have a word for ourselves in a way that would translate to your language," it said. "We're simply the people of the deep forest, the ones who walk between the trees. Your names, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, they're as good as any, I suppose." "How many of you are there?" "Fewer than there used to be. When I was young, there were perhaps 200 of us in the Pacific Northwest. Now, maybe 60, 70 at most. Your species expands, ours contracts. It's the natural order of things, I suppose. The adaptable survive." The creature gestured toward my camera with one massive hand. "You were taking photographs of the bear. Are you a scientist?" "Photographer," I said. "Nature photographer. I sell images to magazines." "Ah, documenting the natural world for those who don't venture into it themselves. That's a noble profession in its way." The creature paused. "Though I notice you haven't reached for your camera to photograph me." The statement hung in the air between us. It was true. Despite the fact that I was sitting 15 feet from what would be the discovery of the century, despite having my camera right next to me, I hadn't even thought about taking a photograph. I don't know if I should," I admitted. "This feels private somehow, like it wouldn't be right." The creature regarded me with those intelligent eyes, and I saw something that might have been respect. "You have more wisdom than most of your kind. Yes, it would be a violation. My people have survived precisely because we remain unphotographed, unproven, existing in the realm of legend and doubt. A clear photograph would destroy that protection. But it would also prove you exist," I said. "People could stop hunting you, could protect your habitat, could put us in cages," the creature interrupted, its voice taking on a harder edge. could study us, dissect us, turn us into curiosities and attractions, could debate whether we have rights, whether we're human enough to deserve protection or just animals to be managed. No, Vincent, anonymity is our greatest defense. I startled at hearing my name. How do you know my name? Your wallet, in your back pocket. I saw you take it out earlier to look at something. A photograph, I think. The wallet has your driver's license visible through the plastic window. Vincent Holloway, born 1953, residing in Portland. I have excellent eyesight. The casual revelation that this creature had been watching me closely enough to read my driver's license from a distance was both fascinating and unsettling. What were you doing here? I asked. Were you following me? I was fishing, the creature said, pointing downstream where the creek curved around a bend. There's a deep pool about a quarter mile that way where salmon gather. I come here often during spawning season. When I heard you approaching this morning, I moved upstream to avoid you. But then I heard you talking. Talking? I wasn't talking to anyone? No, but you were talking to yourself. Humans do that a lot, narrating their own actions, thinking out loud. You said something like, "Perfect light on the water. This is going to be a great shot." And then later, "Come on, bears, where are you?" I found it amusing. I felt my face flush with embarrassment. I did talk to myself when I was alone, a habit I'd developed during solitary hikes. I became curious about you, the creature continued. Most photographers I've observed are loud, careless, moving through the forest like they own it. But you were quiet, respectful, patient. You waited for hours without complaint. That's rare in humans, especially young ones. I'm 27. That's not that young. To me, you're practically a child. I'm 64 years old by human reckoning. When I was your age, your species was fighting something called World War II. The conversation was becoming increasingly surreal. Here I was, sitting on the ground in the Cascade Mountains, discussing history and philosophy with a Bigfoot who was old enough to remember the 1940s. "Why are you telling me all this?" I asked. "Why take the risk of talking to me at all?" The creature was quiet for a long moment, its gaze drifting toward the creek, where the bear had disappeared back into the forest. "Because I'm lonely," it said finally, its voice softer. "My people don't gather often. We're solitary by nature, territorial. I haven't spoken to another of my kind in over a year. And I haven't had a real conversation with a human in, well, I told you, 3 or 4 years." It looked back at me. You seemed different, kind. Someone who might understand that just because something is unknown doesn't mean it should be feared. I felt a strange mixture of compassion and awe. This creature, this intelligent, articulate being that shouldn't exist, was lonely. It had taken a risk approaching me because it needed connection, needed conversation, needed to be heard. "I understand," I said quietly, "and I'm grateful you trusted me enough to talk to me." We sat in silence for a moment, and I could hear the creek flowing, birds calling in the trees, the wind rustling through the canopy above us. It was a perfect summer afternoon in the mountains, and I was having a conversation I'd remember for the rest of my life. Then the creature's expression changed. Its head tilted slightly, and those intelligent eyes focused on something behind me. I turned to look, following its gaze, and my stomach dropped. The Sony recorder was still sitting on the rock where I'd placed it hours earlier. The cassette tape was still turning, the small red recording light still illuminated. It had been recording our entire conversation. The creature stood up slowly, its full height suddenly more imposing. The casual conversational tone vanished from its voice, replaced by something colder, more dangerous. "You're recording this," it said. Not a question, a statement of fact. Yes, but I didn't." I scrambled to my feet, my hands raised in what I hoped was a placating gesture. "I set it up hours ago to record forest sounds. I forgot it was running. I swear I wasn't trying to capture proof of my existence." The creature took a step toward me, and I instinctively backed up. "To take evidence back to your world that we're real? To become famous as the man who proved Bigfoot exists? No, that's not what I want." "Wouldn't you?" The creature's voice grew louder, more forceful. "You're a photographer. Your profession is documentation, proof, evidence. And now you have 90 minutes of me speaking English on tape. Do you have any idea what that's worth? What people would pay for it? What scientists would do to get their hands on it?" The creature was right, and we both knew it. That tape was worth more than I could possibly calculate. It was proof, undeniable, concrete proof that Bigfoot was real, intelligent, and capable of human language. It would change everything. "I won't use it," I said desperately. "I'll erase it right now. Look." I moved toward the recorder, but the creature was faster. It covered the distance between us in 2 massive strides and grabbed the recorder off the rock with surprising gentleness, holding it up to examine it. "Sony TCM 600, it said, reading the label. 60-minute tape capacity, built-in condenser microphone, recording speed of 1.875 inches per second. I've seen advertisements for these in magazines at the ranger station." The creature's knowledge of the recorder's specifications would have been impressive under other circumstances. Right now, it was terrifying. "Please," I said, "I give you my word. I won't tell anyone about this conversation. I'll destroy the tape. You can watch me do it." The creature looked at me, its dark eyes unreadable. "Your word. The word of a human who I've known for less than an hour. Why should I trust that?" "Because I respect you," I said, meaning it with everything I had. "Because you trusted me enough to talk to me, and I won't betray that trust. Because—" I struggled to find the right words. "Because you're lonely, and I understand what that feels like. And I don't want to be the reason you can never risk talking to another human again." The creature was silent, studying me, the recorder still held in one massive hand. I could see the cassette tape inside it, still turning, still recording this tense confrontation. "You understand loneliness?" the creature said finally. "Yes. I spend most of my time alone in the wilderness. My friends don't understand why I prefer forests to bars, why I'd rather photograph birds than go to parties. My parents think I'm wasting my education. My last girlfriend left me because she said I loved the mountains more than I loved her." I took a breath. "I'm not comparing my loneliness to yours. What you experience must be so much worse. But I understand the need for connection, for someone to talk to who actually listens." The creature's expression softened slightly. It looked down at the recorder in its hand, then back at me. "If I let you keep this tape," it said slowly, "if I trust you to destroy it or never use it, what guarantee do I have? What's to stop you from going back to Portland tonight and selling it to the highest bidder?" "Nothing," I admitted, "except my word. And I know that's not much, but it's all I can offer." We stood there in the afternoon sunlight, human and Sasquatch, locked in a moment that would define both of our futures. The bear had long since left the creek. The salmon continued their upstream journey, oblivious to the drama unfolding on the bank. Then the creature did something unexpected. It held out the recorder to me. "Take it," it said. I reached out carefully and took the recorder from its hand. Our fingers touched briefly. Its skin was surprisingly warm, leathery, with calluses that spoke of a lifetime in the wilderness. "I'm going to trust you, Vincent Holloway," the creature said. "Not because I'm certain you'll honor your word, but because I want to believe that some humans are still capable of putting ethics above opportunity. I want to believe that you're one of them." "I am," I said. "I promise you, I am." "Then prove it. Erase that tape now while I watch." I looked down at the recorder in my hands, at the cassette still turning inside. This was it, the moment of decision. I could claim the recorder malfunctioned, run back to my Bronco, and drive away with the most significant recording in cryptozoological history. I'd be famous. I'd be wealthy. Every magazine in the world would want to interview me. Or I could keep my word to a creature that had trusted me with its existence. I pressed the stop button. The tape ceased moving. Then I pressed the rewind button, watching as the tape spooled backward, erasing as it went. The recorder had a bulk erase function. If you held down the record and play buttons simultaneously while rewinding, It would magnetically erase the tape as it rewound. I did exactly that. The creature watched in silence as the tape rewound completely, erasing every word of our conversation, every sound of its voice. When the rewind finished, I pressed play. Static. Nothing but static. I ejected the cassette and held it out to the creature. Here, you can keep it if you want, or destroy it. Whatever makes you feel safer. The creature took the cassette and turned it over in its large hands, examining it. Then, with sudden force, it crushed the cassette between its palms. Plastic shattered, tape spilled out in long brown ribbons, and the creature let the pieces fall to the ground. "Thank you," it said quietly. "You're welcome." We stood there for a moment longer, and then the creature spoke again, its voice returning to that earlier conversational tone. "I misjudged you. You chose integrity over profit. That's rare, especially in your society where everything seems to have a price." "Not everything," I said. "Some things are more valuable than money." "Yes." The creature looked around at the forest, at the creek, at the mountains rising in the distance. "I should go. It's not safe for us to spend too much time together. The longer we talk, the greater the chance someone else will come along." "Will I ever see you again?" I asked, surprising myself with the question. The creature considered this. "Perhaps. If you come back to this valley, stay respectful and quiet. I may visit you again, but no recording devices, no cameras pointed in my direction. Just conversation, if that's acceptable." "More than acceptable. I'd like that." The creature nodded, then began to turn away, but it paused and looked back at me one more time. "What you did today, keeping your word, erasing that tape, that took courage. It also took something else. Recognition that some beings have the right to remain hidden, to exist on their own terms without human documentation and interference. Your species could benefit from more people who think that way." "I'll try to be that kind of person," I said. "You already are, Vincent. That's why I trusted you." And then the creature simply walked away, moving through the forest with surprising silence for something so large. Within seconds, it had disappeared into the thick undergrowth, leaving me alone by the creek with my camera, my destroyed recording, and a memory I knew I'd carry for the rest of my life. I stood there for a long time after it left, processing what had happened. I'd met Bigfoot. I'd had a conversation with it. And I'd chosen to erase the proof because it was the right thing to do. Eventually, I packed up my equipment. The bear never returned, and I no longer cared about getting photographs. What I'd experienced was so much more significant than any image I could have captured. I hiked back to my Bronco as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. When I reached my vehicle, I sat in the driver's seat for a while just thinking before starting the engine and beginning the long drive back to Portland. On the drive home, I listened to the radio. Paul McCartney's Coming Up was playing, and I thought about what the creature had said about loneliness, about trust, about the value of keeping some things hidden. I thought about the choice I'd made and whether I'd regret it later. I didn't regret it. Not then, and not in all the years that followed. When I got back to my apartment in Portland around 11 p.m., I developed the film from that day. The photographs of the bear were good, some of the best wildlife shots I'd taken all year. I sent them to Outdoor Life magazine the following week, and they published them in their October issue with a nice check that helped pay my rent for 2 months. But the photographs felt less important now. They were just images, just documentation of the natural world that anyone with patience and a good camera could capture. What I'd experienced with the creature, that was unique, irreplaceable, something that couldn't be reduced to film or tape. I did return to that valley 3 weeks later in early August. I hiked to the same creek, set up in the same spot, and waited. I brought no recording equipment, no special cameras, just myself and a thermos of coffee. Around noon, the creature appeared, stepping out of the forest as casually as if we'd arranged to meet. "You came back," it said. I said I would. We talked for hours that day. The creature, it eventually told me, I could call it Walker, a name it had chosen for itself after listening to humans discuss names and their meanings. Asked me questions about human society, about technology, about politics and culture. It was fascinated by the upcoming presidential election, by the Iran hostage crisis that had dominated the news for months, by the ways humans organized themselves into nations and governments. In return, I asked about its life, its history, the world of the Sasquatch that existed in the shadows of human civilization. Walker told me about growing up in the forests of British Columbia in the 1930s, about migrating south with its family group during World War II, when logging operations expanded dramatically to supply timber for the war effort. We could hear the war even in the deep forest, Walker said. Aircraft flying overhead, increased human activity, the sound of distant explosions from military training exercises. It was a frightening time for us. We realized your species had developed weapons that could destroy entire landscapes. We moved deeper into remote areas, avoided humans even more carefully than before. Walker spoke about the difficulty of survival in an increasingly human-dominated landscape, how roads fragmented their territories, how clear-cut logging destroyed food sources, how human recreation pushed into areas that had once been safe havens. In my grandfather's time in the 1800s, we could travel for hundreds of miles and rarely encounter humans, Walker explained. Now you can barely travel 50 miles in any direction without crossing a road or encountering a hiking trail. Your species has claimed almost everything. Do you resent us? I asked. For taking over? Walker was quiet for a moment, considering the question. Resent? No. That would be like resenting the tide for coming in. Your species is successful because it adapts, because it modifies environments to suit its needs. From an evolutionary perspective, that's admirable. But it does make survival difficult for those of us who prefer to remain unmodified by civilization. We met 5 more times that summer of 1980, always at the same creek, always during daylight hours when the risk of encountering other humans was lowest. Each time, our conversations deepened. Walker told me about Sasquatch social structure, how they were primarily solitary but maintained loose family connections, how they communicated across distances using vocalizations that humans often mistook for owls or coyotes, how they had territories that could span 50 square miles. I told Walker about my life, my dreams of becoming a renowned nature photographer, my complicated relationship with my parents, my struggles to find meaning in a world that often felt too fast, too loud, too focused on material success. You're caught between two worlds, Walker observed during our 4th meeting, not fully comfortable in human society, but unable to fully embrace the wilderness. You're liminal, Vincent, existing in the spaces between. Is that a bad thing? No. Liminal beings often see truths that others miss. You see the value in both civilization and wilderness. That perspective is rare and valuable. As summer turned to fall, our meetings became less frequent. Walker explained that as winter approached, it needed to focus on building food reserves, on preparing for the cold months when foraging became difficult. Will you be okay? I asked during what turned out to be our last meeting of 1980 in late September. Do you have enough food stored? I've survived 64 winters, Walker said, with what I'd learned to recognize as amusement. I'll survive this one too, but I appreciate your concern. Will I see you next year? Perhaps. If I'm still in this area, if you return to this valley, if circumstances allow. But Vincent, you should know, my people don't stay in one place forever. We migrate, following food sources and avoiding human encroachment. There may come a time when I move on, when these mountains become too crowded or too dangerous. Where would you go? North probably, back toward Canada, or perhaps east toward Idaho and Montana. There are still wild places there, though they're shrinking every year. We said goodbye that day, not knowing if we'd ever see each other again. I hiked back to my Bronco, feeling a profound sense of loss, like I was leaving behind a friend I might never see again. But I did see Walker again, many times in fact over the next several years. Through the early 1980s, I made regular trips to that valley, and more often than not, Walker would appear. We'd talk for hours about everything and nothing: philosophy, ecology, human nature, the changing world around us. Walker was there when Mount St. Helens erupted in May 1980 and described watching the ash cloud spread across the sky from a ridge 15 miles away. "It was like the mountain was angry," Walker said. "Your scientists say it was just pressure and magma, but standing there watching it, it felt like the Earth itself was protesting something." Walker was there when Reagan won the presidency in November 1980, and we discussed what that might mean for environmental policy, for wilderness protection, for the forests that Walker called home. Walker was there through the recession of the early 1980s, when my photography income declined and I had to take a part-time job at a camera store in Portland to make ends meet. "Your species ties its survival to pieces of paper and metal discs," Walker observed, referring to money. "It's a strange system. Among my people, wealth is measured in knowledge, in strength, in the ability to survive. No one can take those things from you. Our friendship, because that's what it was, despite the impossibility of it, became one of the most important relationships in my life." Walker was wise, patient, and genuinely interested in understanding human nature. I learned more about philosophy and ethics from those conversations in the forest than I ever had in school. But nothing lasts forever. In the spring of 1984, I arrived at our usual meeting place to find Walker already there, and immediately knew something was wrong. The creature looked thinner than usual, and there was a wound on its left arm, a deep gash that looked infected. "What happened?" I asked, alarmed. "A trap," Walker said quietly. "I was traveling through a clear-cut area 2 valleys over, foraging for early mushrooms, and I stepped into a bear trap someone had set, illegally. It took me an hour to free myself. I could see the injury was serious. The trap had cut through skin and muscle, and the wound was inflamed, oozing. Walker needed medical attention, but obviously couldn't walk into a hospital. "I have first aid supplies in my truck," I said. "Let me get them. I can clean that wound, bandage it properly." "No, Vincent. It's too risky for you to be seen carrying medical supplies into the forest. Someone might wonder what you're treating." "I don't care. You need help." We argued about it, but eventually Walker relented. I hiked quickly back to my Bronco. I was driving a newer model by then, a 1982 version in blue and white, and grabbed my expanded first aid kit. I'd started carrying more comprehensive medical supplies after learning about Walker's existence, just in case. I cleaned the wound as best I could, applied antibiotic ointment, and wrapped it in gauze and bandages. Walker sat patiently through the process, though I could see the pain in its eyes. "You should rest," I told Walker when I'd finished. "Let this heal. Don't push yourself." "I can't rest," Walker said. "There's something I need to tell you, something I've been putting off." It paused, and I saw something in those intelligent eyes that I'd never seen before: fear. "I'm leaving Vincent. Permanently. I'm migrating north, back to Canada, possibly all the way to Alaska." My stomach dropped. "Why? Is it because of the trap?" "The trap is a symptom of the larger problem. This area is becoming too developed, too populated. There are too many logging roads, too many hikers, too many people setting traps and hunting in areas they shouldn't. 5 years ago, I could move through these mountains and encounter humans once a month. Now it's once a week. It's not safe anymore." "When are you leaving?" "Soon, within the month. I wanted to say goodbye properly, to thank you for these years of conversation. You've been a good friend, Vincent. Better than I expected any human could be." I felt tears in my eyes, and I didn't try to hide them. "You've been a good friend to me, too, the best friend I've had. Honestly, I'm going to miss our talks. As will I. But this is necessary. My survival depends on remaining hidden, and that's becoming impossible here." We sat together for a long time that day, not talking much, just sharing space. When the sun began to set and I had to leave, Walker stood and placed one massive hand on my shoulder. "Live well, Vincent Holloway. Remember what we talked about, the value of wild places, the importance of leaving some things undocumented and unknown. Carry those lessons forward." "I will, I promise." That was the last time I saw Walker. I returned to the valley several times over the following months, hoping for one more meeting, but the creature never appeared. Eventually, I accepted that Walker was truly gone, had migrated north to safer territory, and I was left with only memories of our impossible friendship. Life moved forward, as it always does. I continued working as a nature photographer through the 1980s and into the 1990s, building a solid reputation and eventually publishing 3 books of wilderness photography. I never married, never had children, preferring instead to spend my time in the forests and mountains that had always felt more like home than any building could. The conversations with Walker changed me in fundamental ways. I became an advocate for wilderness preservation, donating portions of my photography income to conservation organizations. I wrote articles arguing for leaving certain areas undeveloped, for respecting the wild places that still existed. I never mentioned Walker, never hinted at the real reason for my passion, but those who knew me recognized that something had shifted in my perspective after 1980. My parents passed away in the early 1990s, my father in 1991 from a heart attack, my mother in 1993 from cancer. At their funerals, relatives asked me about my life, why I'd never settled down, why I was still wandering around in the woods at 40 years old. I tried to explain that I had settled down, just not in the way they understood. The wilderness was my home. The forests were my family. In 1995, when I was 42, I made a decision that surprised everyone who knew me. I sold my apartment in Portland and bought a small cabin on 5 acres of forested land in the Cascade foothills, about 90 miles east of the city. The property was remote, accessible only by a rough dirt road with no neighbors within 2 miles. It was perfect. I spent the next 30 years living there, supporting myself through photography sales, book royalties, and eventually some teaching. I gave workshops on nature photography that attracted students from around the country. But mostly I lived quietly, watching the seasons change, observing the wildlife that passed through my property, and remembering the conversations I'd had with a creature that most people believed was a myth. I never told anyone about Walker, not my parents before they died, not my few close friends, not the students who came to my workshops asking about my most memorable wildlife encounters. The secret stayed locked inside me, a private treasure that I'd promised to protect. But I thought about Walker often, especially on quiet evenings when I'd sit on my cabin porch with a cup of coffee, listening to the forest sounds. I wondered if Walker had made it to Canada or Alaska, if the creature had found safer territory, if there were still wild places remote enough for beings like Walker to survive. I wondered if Walker ever thought about me, about our conversations by that creek in 1980. The world changed dramatically during those decades. The internet arrived, transforming how information spread. Cell phones became ubiquitous, giving everyone the ability to document and share instantly. Trail cameras proliferated in forests, automatically photographing anything that moved. Drones began flying over wilderness areas equipped with high-resolution cameras. The world became smaller, more documented, more connected. And I worried constantly about Walker and others like it, about how they could possibly survive in an era when privacy and anonymity were disappearing. I'm 72 years old now, living in the same cabin I bought in 1995. My hair is white. My joints ache on cold mornings, and my eyesight isn't what it used to be. I still photograph the natural world, though I use digital cameras now instead of film. The technology has changed, but the essential act of witnessing and documenting nature remains the same. I've been thinking a lot lately about that day in 1980 when I erased the recording of Walker's voice, about the choice I made and whether it was the right one. In the 45 years since then, Bigfoot has remained a mystery, a legend, something people argue about, but never prove. There have been hoaxes, blurry photographs, dubious videos, but never the kind of concrete evidence that would force science to acknowledge their existence. And I could have changed that. I had 90 minutes of a Sasquatch speaking perfect English on tape, and I erased it. Some people might say I made the wrong choice, that I deprived humanity of crucial knowledge, that I put one creature's privacy above the advancement of science and understanding. They might argue that proving Bigfoot exists could have led to habitat protection, to conservation efforts, to legal protections for the species. But I know Walker was right. A tape like that wouldn't have led to protection. It would have led to a manhunt, or rather, a Sasquatch hunt. Every forest in the Pacific Northwest would have been flooded with researchers, hunters, curiosity seekers, all desperate to be the first to capture one. The military might have gotten involved, treating them as potential security threats or biological specimens to study. Walker's worst fears would have come true. I made the right choice. I'm certain of that now, more than ever. Last week, something remarkable happened. I was sitting on my porch in the early evening, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple, when I heard a sound from the forest behind my cabin. A low, resonant vocalization that I hadn't heard in 45 years, but recognized immediately. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding, and walked to the edge of my clearing. And there, standing in the shadows between the trees, was a figure I'd thought I'd never see again. Walker looked older, the hair more gray than brown now, the face more lined, the movement slightly stiffer. But the eyes were the same, intelligent and aware, watching me with recognition and something that might have been affection. "Hello, Vincent," Walker said, the voice deeper than I remembered, but unmistakably the same. "It's been a long time." I found myself crying, tears running down my weathered face, unable to speak for a moment. Then I managed to say, "I thought you were gone. I thought I'd never see you again. I almost didn't come back. It's not safe, even here. But I'm old now, and I wanted to see you one more time before—" Walker paused. "Before my time ends. We don't live forever, Vincent. Even my kind has limits." We talked for hours that evening, catching up on 45 years. Walker had made it to British Columbia, had lived in remote areas of the Coast Mountains, had survived and even found others of its kind. "There are more of us than I thought," Walker told me. "Perhaps 150 in Canada and Alaska, living in the most remote areas. We've become very good at staying hidden." I told Walker about my life, about the cabin, about my continued photography work, about how I'd never forgotten our conversations or broken my promise to keep Walker's existence secret. "I knew you wouldn't," Walker said. "That's why I trusted you. That's why I'm here now." As the moon rose and the stars appeared, Walker stood to leave. "This is goodbye, Vincent. Truly goodbye this time. I won't be back. I'm too old for travel now, and this journey from Canada took everything I had. But I wanted you to know that what we shared in 1980, those conversations, they mattered to me. They gave me hope that your species isn't completely lost, that some humans still understand the value of mystery and wildness." "They mattered to me too," I said, "more than I can express. You changed my life, Walker. You taught me what really matters." Walker nodded slowly. "Then my risk in approaching you all those years ago was worthwhile. Live well, Vincent Holloway. Whatever time you have left, spend it wisely. Protect the wild places. Tell the stories that need telling, and keep our secret. I will, I promise, again." Walker reached out and placed a hand on my shoulder, just as it had done in 1984. The touch was warm and real and full of unspoken meaning. Then Walker turned and walked back into the forest, disappearing into the darkness between the trees. I stood there for a long time after Walker left, looking up at the stars, listening to the night sounds of the forest, owls hooting, small animals rustling in the underbrush, wind moving through pine branches. The same sounds I'd heard 45 years ago by that creek when I'd made a choice that defined the rest of my life. Now, sitting here in my cabin, writing this account, I face another choice. What do I do with this story? I'm 72 years old. I won't live forever. At some point, probably soon, this secret will die with me unless I share it. But sharing it would violate the promise I made. It would expose Walker and others like it to exactly the kind of attention they've spent centuries avoiding. Even without physical proof, no photographs, no recordings, no evidence beyond my word, this story could trigger new searches, new interest, new threats to their survival. So I've decided to write this account and seal it in an envelope to be opened only after my death. Maybe decades from now, when I'm gone and Walker is gone and the world has changed even more than it already has, someone will read this and understand what I experienced. Or maybe they'll dismiss it as the ramblings of an old photographer who spent too much time alone in the woods. Either way, I'll have kept my promise. The secret will stay protected during my lifetime, and Walker will have had the privacy and safety it deserved. To whoever eventually reads this, I'm Vincent Holloway, and I'm telling you the truth. Bigfoot is real. They're intelligent, articulate, and trying desperately to survive in a world that keeps shrinking around them. They speak English, at least some of them do. They understand human society better than we understand theirs, and they've chosen to remain hidden, not out of inability to communicate, but because they know what would happen if they revealed themselves. Respect that choice. If you go into the wilderness, go quietly and humbly. Leave no trace. Take no more than memories. And if you're extraordinarily lucky, if you're in the right place at the right time with the right attitude, you might glimpse something extraordinary. But if you do, I'm asking you, begging you to do what I did. Keep it to yourself. Let them remain mysterious. Protect their right to exist on their own terms, undocumented and free. Some things are more important than proof. Some beings deserve to live without human interference. And some friendships, even the impossible ones, are sacred enough to protect at any cost. I made the right choice in 1980 when I erased that tape. I'm making the right choice now by sealing this account and letting it remain hidden until I'm gone. And I hope, I pray, that whoever eventually reads this will make the right choice too. The wild places are disappearing. The mysteries are being solved and documented and explained away. But please, let this one remain. Let the Sasquatch stay in the realm of legend and shadow. They've earned that right through centuries of patience and adaptation. They're out there in the deep forests, in the remote mountains, in the places where humans rarely go. They're watching, listening, surviving, and they deserve to keep doing so without our interference. That's my story. That's what happened when a Bigfoot spoke to me in perfect English on a summer day in 1980. I'm not asking you to believe it. I'm just asking you to respect it, to understand why I kept it secret, and to carry forward the same respect for wild things that Walker taught me all those years ago. The sun is setting now. I can see it through my cabin window, painting the forest in shades of gold and amber, the same way it did 45 years ago by that creek. I'm going to seal this account now, place it in my safety deposit box with instructions that it not be opened until after my death. And then I'm going to sit on my porch with a cup of coffee and watch the stars come out, just like I've done almost every evening for the past 30 years. I'll listen to the forest sounds and think about Walker, about our conversations, about the choice I made and never regretted. Some things are meant to remain unknown. Some friendships transcend the need for proof, and some promises are worth keeping no matter the cost. I kept my promise, Walker. For 45 years and counting, I kept it. And I'll keep it until the day I die. That's enough. That has to be enough.